We have a great panel here, and I'll first turn it over to both of them to just get a better sense of, what got you here, what got you in journalism. I think you both have different paths of how you got to Vice, but I'll start with Amel Mansour, the creative director of Vice, and tell me a bit about what got you to where you are today.
I think it was probably self-indulgent, the way that I went about constructing my career, but really it was finding the opportunities when they presented themselves and communicating what it is that I wanted to do at the time. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves when we're younger about knowing it all at that moment, but I think exploration is probably the most exciting. So I went to school, I got a business degree because process of elimination, and I couldn't sketch well enough to go into fashion. So I had really conservative parents who were like, I don't think you're gonna make money in that, so you better get a real degree. So I got the real degree, and I went into corporate environment for about 3 years and decided that I wanted my soul back. So I was one of the lucky ones to get laid off in 2008. And from that, I stumbled into an opportunity of working for a musician for 4 years, and he was really creative, and we worked on a lot of content. It was my first time working on media and first time working in a video medium, having to lead a team and doing it in a non-traditional space, which was either my living room or an airplane. And learning to ask for help, learning to communicate what it is that I could do and leverage my skill set. And then I went into news for a little bit because I was also a passion, and I hadn't satiated that yet. And then that's how I got to Vice.
And Danny Gold, the correspondent for Vice, just got back from Iraq just a couple weeks ago.
I can't follow that up, though. That was really...
I've never been to Iraq, so you
okay.
could be there.
Yeah.
God, where do I start? I wasted a lot of opportunity in undergrad. If you guys are still in undergrad, take advantage of it. And then I sort of bounced around for a few years. I did a lot of working jobs that no one should do so I could travel. Moving back with my parents a few times, which is nice if you can do that. It's not great, but it's better than having nowhere to live. So I did that a bunch, and then I tried to make a film overseas. I was able to sort of capitalize on some travel and stay on a friend's couch and try to make a documentary film because I decided that's what I wanted to do. And I came back with it, and I took like a month-long class on how to shoot. Like a really intensive class on how to edit, tried to make a film. I had a great topic, I had the story, but I didn't know what to do with it when I had it. Where to go, who to talk to, really how to operate in the documentary world, the journalism world, anything like that. So I decided that I would use that to get into graduate school. I applied to all the schools in New York, and CUNY offered me money, so I went there. And from there, just getting to go back to school for a topic that you are actually passionate about and knowing what you want to do, which I didn't have that experience in undergrad because I wasn't mature enough to really know, it's pretty monumental. And I don't think it's necessary for anyone who wants to go into journalism or to do what I do. But for me, I needed direction. I needed to sort of take time away from everything else and spend a year and a half focusing on that. So that's what I did. Though. So I ended up at the Wall Street Journal as a stringer for them, which is a fantastic place to work for. They pay extremely well. They're very kind, which you don't find a lot of in the like really old school New York newspaper worlds. They say thank you a lot, which was very new to me. So I worked there for a while, and what I realized was that journalism isn't what it was 20 years ago. You're not going to start at a newspaper and work your way up and then get sent overseas, and I knew I wanted to do that. It just doesn't, that career path doesn't really exist anymore. If you want to do that, you have to show people that you can, you have to earn it. And I still meet people, and I still have friends that talk about how they want to do this or they're gonna do this, and most of them don't do it. So simply by just even trying that, even just like going, saving up money, going somewhere, and I know not everyone can do that, but even just by attempting it and showing that you're capable of taking that chance, people will start to respect you more, even if your work's not that good. So I started doing trips overseas. I had a lot of friends in the journalism world. I had contacts here that could help me out. The first place I actually went to was Northern Iraq, because I worked with a colleague from a New York newspaper that was Kurdish, and he was very well connected. He had worked there for years, and I leveraged that. And we'd have like weekly meetings, so he could update me on what was going on. And I started, email people, call people. That's the one good thing about working for a daily newspaper, is any fear you have of talking to anyone is gone, because otherwise you won't last. I remember like in journalism school being scared to pick up the phone sometimes. And after 6 weeks of working for a New York newspaper, which I highly recommend you all do if they still exist when you're out of school, it'll beat that fear out of you, which you can't have that fear if you want to do this. Yeah, so I started taking trips overseas and saved up money. So I would go, I would lose money on these trips, come back, and I remember the first one I spent a month there, and I came back and I got maybe like 1 or 2 things published in like a month, lost money. But the second time I went, I had an editor that I could contact who liked my work from before. I had a better idea of how to do this. So the second time I went, I think I broke even, and I sold like 4 or 5 articles, and I was still working for the journal back here, and then it sort of, you just kept going. I applied for fellowships. I got a fellowship. Definitely apply for everything you can, and started publishing more stuff. And then when Vice launched the news division, I knew the editor-in-chief just from mutual friends, and he asked me to come and be a part of it. But they actually hired me to be a writer, which is what I was doing, and now I do pretty much only video. And what happened with that is that no one really, like, print just doesn't have the same power these days as video does. Print is still what I want to do. But to get to be sent overseas, which is what I enjoy most, you have to do video. So I have to switch. And I think that's an important lesson too. You've got to be willing to adjust, to adapt actually what you do.
So, I mean, what do you recommend if a student is thinking, I may want to study abroad? You know, should they be thinking, well, here's a language I know, or maybe I should go where there's a particular hotspot because that maybe editors might want more work from this particular area. I mean, what would you say to somebody who's thinking, you know, after I get out of school, I have a little money saved up, I want to go somewhere and start trying to freelance?
I mean, what a lot of people do is I have a lot of friends that went to Cairo and Beirut and started working for local English language papers there, and then were able to get the call when they needed it, and start freelancing and do stuff like that. Hotspots are tricky because hotspots are already going to have a lot of media there, so you're really not going to stand out. But also going to an area that's not well covered at all, there's a reason it's not covered, because editors don't care about it, and that usually affects the public not caring about it, which is harsh. You kind of have to find that middle ground where there's still a situation where you can report something that not everyone else is doing, but that's also, you know, still something topical that people are going to be interested in. And the best way to find those stories is to base yourself somewhere. That's, you know, if you're young enough to do it, if you speak a language, if you don't mind that sort of thing, definitely go that route, because I think that's how most people who do what I do got started.
And Amel, what are you looking for in somebody who may want to work at Vice? What are the sort of attributes and the background experience? Like you said, both of you had various ways of how you got to Vice. I think a lot of people, you know, I get this all the time from students thinking there's some linear path to get you from point A to point B. But what are some of the attributes or experience or different types of things you're looking for in an entry-level internship? I,
unlike Danny, don't have a very traditional journalism background, but we tell stories at Vice. And I think the general model at Vice, which is different from other media and journalism outputs, are we focus more on creating an empathy machine and making sure that the stories we're telling may not be of interest to mainstream media or a mainstream audience, but there are people that care, and the way that we deliver it is the reason they care. By people who look like them, share a similar kind of nuanced approach in culture. And some of the top senior people, or the ones that are gatekeepers at Vice, are people who started as interns and are part of the DNA of Vice. And they all were very curious. They were good communicators. We work really hard. We have a really great, I would say, demographic of interest within Vice. And that kind of dynamic and melting pot lends itself to the more interesting content that we put out. So our interns are really valuable. We treat them as colleagues. We don't introduce them as interns, at least on our team. And our interns pitch stories, they review pitches, they go out into the field and shoot. They have to be reliable, and they have to be really astute in understanding, is this a story that would be worth listening to? So we put a lot of trust in our interns, and a lot of them just kind of walked up to us and said, you need me. Yeah.
Broadly launched in August. You know, there's a lot of women's focused publications, news sites. What are some of the stories that you feel like really show how Broadly is trying to highlight voices that maybe the mainstream media has not been covering?
One of the best things I've heard from our EIC is that we're telling stories by getting off of our couch, which is happening, I would say, more across the other platforms. And we also are doing them through a video medium, which is what Danny mentioned about being really important for being sustainable and competitive, and even, having relevancy in your voice is making sure that you're covered across all mediums. We talk about the legislation of women's bodies, and right now we're working on a documentary about maternity leave and how the US falls behind all developing countries or developed countries and superpowers. We did a really incredible documentary about abortion pills across the world. We just covered a really interesting man in Turkey who is the only creationist and has a slew of women that he calls kittens who feel very empowered. We take, obviously, a feminist approach, but it's the modern feminist approach where our interests vary, and we'll talk about things that are political and controversial, but we also talk about Justin Bieber because they can coexist.
Vice has really departed from the kind of neutral style that you see in TV news, where you're doing a stand-up in front of the Capitol in a country, or you're outside of a famous landmark in Paris, and you're saying what happened, and you're saying what the president said today and what the State Department said. You're trying to find different stories. So when you go out to cover somewhere like Iraq or elsewhere that do have international media that are being covered, what are you looking for in the stories that you want to tell?
Most broadcast news is 2.5 minutes, and it's very routine. Sound bites, that's it. We can let our things go for 10, 12 minutes. You can have interviews that last 4 or 5 minutes. You can actually really get, it's not the typical 2 sentences and out. You can actually really hear what someone has to say, which I think people appreciate.
What are you thinking when you go out there in terms of, I want to, continue this in a series, or I want to do one big documentary? Like, what makes you think of the type of medium that it should be? 3 minutes, a half hour, things like that.
And you can get a feel for what it is. When there's a breaking news event happening and you're not sure what you're going to be doing day to day, that lends itself more towards dispatches, because you go out, you shoot for a day, you figure out what's happening, and you put it up. The documentaries tend to be more fully fleshed out, a longer pre-production time. You really sort of know. You can never know what you're doing day to day, but you have a better idea of it. And it's less of a breaking news event, which, you can tell the difference.
We let the story live, and that's actually what dictates to us the template or the runtime on a video. But we also send out editors and correspondents to very relevant and topical spaces as well. But as soon as it's boring for us, that's when we're ending it.
Next year, you have Vice is going to be doing a daily half-hour show on HBO. They already do the weekly news magazine HBO. And then also Viceland is launching, taking over H2 24/7. And that's going to be more a cultural base, more entertainment side. Can you tell me a bit about what Vice is thinking doing TV channels? And are you going to get people to watch in real time to turn on their TV? Is this audience, the audience that's in this room, are you hoping that they turn it on?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I think they will. If you teach an audience that this is a location in which they will find something that is relevant and pertinent to them, then I don't think where that medium lives is going to be a barrier. Mm-hmm. We're all interested in different things, and there's obviously a lot of cachet and equity with the Vice brand, and us kind of going into the TV space is a really great challenge for us internally, but also showing that TV doesn't need to be a dying medium if you're telling the right stories. Mm-hmm.
Do you see yourself as a correspondent almost like, you're the bridge for the audience into this world in a way?
Yeah, but I think it's important too to know when to get out of the way. And I think that is a big difference in what makes a good correspondent or not, is you have to bring people in, but you also have to realize that it's not about you, it's not about your experiences. But I think, that doesn't always work. I think we do some stuff where the correspondent becomes the star, And that's, I think, more okay for a cultural piece as opposed to a news piece. Because I think that takes the focus away from the actual story and the people that are going through it. I think it's important too, whether you're writing or doing video, I mean, I don't mind when people include themselves in their articles, but you've got to serve as a conduit for what other people are experiencing. It's not about you, it's not about your experience there. It's about what you're seeing, what the people you're talking to, what their lives are like. And I think that it works really to lure an audience in, is to have someone like myself or like the correspondents that we have, bring them there. Because I think that they can relate to that. And we ask questions that they're probably thinking as well. And if you can get someone to open up, it's a lot easier to do it in conversation than sticking a camera in someone's face.
Yeah. I mean, tell me a bit about, you. Like I said, you were in Iraq, you recently reported in El Salvador, you covered the Ebola outbreak in Africa. What's it like going to some of these places, and how do you feel? Do you feel secure? How does Vice watch out for its correspondents when they're abroad? I mean, we know a lot of what's happened in Syria, but even other places, it can be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I feel safe for the most part. I mean, there's always moments where you're a bit doubtful or where things can get a bit hairy. I used to be a freelancer, and I have a lot of friends who still are. And compared to the safety precautions that they get to take, I take, much more excessively. We have people on standby. We have GPS trackers. We have satellite phones. There's someone checking in with me, depending on how intense the situation is, whether a few hours or a few days. And at this point, most of the people that I go with, I know are experienced and have been in these situations before. And a lot of it comes down to the people that you're working with locally and whether you trust them or not. And I know that we put them through a vetting process. And some of the hairier situations people have been in, they've hired, security contractors, people like that. I know they did that in Afghanistan pretty much almost every time. So yeah, I mean, I do feel relatively safe, but it's always a question. But there's ways to mitigate that. It's never like you don't run into anything head first. And even a really bad area, for the most part, can be done relatively safely.
We have a really robust infrastructure. So similar to what Danny said, a lot of things, as much as possible, are going to be vetted. If within that circumstance things go awry, our correspondents and storytellers feel comfortable enough to abandon the story if it's going to put them in severe danger. A lot of times it just takes someone being talked off the ledge, I think, and showing what the intention is. But we are very aware and self-aware of the situations that we're going into. So if it's about covering a brothel or human trafficking in Spain, or it's about a drone going over a border in Poland to bring abortion pills, we obviously leverage all security that's available and make sure that we're always in constant communication. And if something is really bad, we just move. Yeah.
No, you mentioned a Turkey film, and I remember that your correspondent was out there, and at one point they said, no, you can't use your cameras at all. But at the same time, she used a cell phone camera when she could, just to get some of those images out. I mean, have you run into other examples where people go back on their word and say, okay, they were going to give you this access, and all of a sudden they turn around and said they won't? And how do you handle that?
I think it's sometimes people get spooked. Once cameras are up, there's a different perception. And I think you, as a storyteller or journalist, should always be prepared to kind of pivot your story or be resourceful. And if that takes actually recording into a voice note on your iPhone and documenting what it is and using that in a compelling way, or shutting down using a black card and coming back and saying, we didn't have access, but here's how I recall the story. Things are just as relevant, even if it's not as immersive or as captured. I mean, some of the best stories are those that are orated as they've been recalled. So we do have backup plans, but we also understand the importance of continuing the story, even though the access is not as granted.
A trickier thing is when you're dealing with someone who promises you access and you're talking to them and they have second thoughts because of their own personal safety issues. And that's when things get really tricky. But for the most part, you'll offer them covering up their faces, changing their voices, things along those lines. I find that in journalism, there are people who will push in that situation too much. I think it's okay to try to push a little bit, but it ends up being a very tough judgment call, and I think most of the time you should walk away.
Right. I mean, you mentioned that in Turkey right now, Turkey is working with a local journalist. Vice is working with a local journalist in Turkey who's still been imprisoned.
Yeah.
Two Vice journalists were let go, and I know Vice and a lot of people in media are still trying to push for his release.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the role of local journalists in the work you do?
But I will. But first, you guys should go. There's a hashtag Free Rasool, RASOOL. If you haven't signed the petition, please do. If you know anyone that can make a difference in that regard, please contact them or let us know. They're the most important thing that you deal with. And whether you want to call them a fixer or a local producer or whatever, you're really only as good as your fixers. Yeah, I mean, without them, it's like there's almost, they are most of the time who's going to keep you safe. They're going to tell you who's being honest and who's not. And not just like on video, like aside, let you know what's really going on, what he's heard, what everyone else is saying, because we don't have access to that. We don't have those networks that are built in already. Mm-hmm. So it is the most important thing, and it's also really important to make sure that the person you're working with is vetted. I will not work with someone who I don't know someone else has worked with them before, because they could be mistranslating things. They could be, if they have a certain bias, they could be lending themselves to that bias. Or if they're reckless, they could get you in a lot. Not just it's not just them that can be at risk. They can get you in a lot of trouble as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the most important thing in doing the kind of reporting that I do.
Right.
Yeah, I think it makes for a better story too. So if you're a journalist coming from an outside perspective, you're going to ask different questions than someone who is a local and has a little bit more of maybe cultural restrictions, has some biases. It's almost as if it's more protective family. You're not going to air your dirty laundry. But this balance between being fringe and curious about what's going on, in addition to the partnership that you have with your local producer, essentially gets you the really, really rich story. Mm-hmm. We had an experience where we went to go talk about travel sex tourism and men in certain places that were being exploited by women who were going just for sex, but they were men that were living in really poverty-stricken countries. And our local fixer was too embarrassed to talk about sex. So all of the questions were coming back really benign. The answers were coming back really benign. And we realized maybe, an hour into the interview that it couldn't all be just, a conversation about vegetables. So we had to adjust and find someone that was comfortable and wasn't ashamed and wasn't burdened with having to go back into the community and say, I'm sorry that I talked about something that is really taboo. But then you have other places where a local producer or fixer that you have a really great partnership with actually uncovers and helps you uncover certain things just by reading someone culturally or understanding context for a certain space. That way, I would recommend that every single one of you really, really leverage the access that you have through the internet and through networks and how you can reach someone on the other side of the world and build a relationship with them, a cyber digital relationship and trust and telling stories, because you really are nothing without your network and relying on them, and everyone has a mutual benefit that they can. You're not just going in as like a safari tourism and saying, okay, I really want to showcase a story that's dynamic from your region, but there's a value in exchange as well. And developing those things make, I think, how we've built Vice. We have a network of 10,000 people that we reach out to, and a lot of times it's reoccurring. It's an in-house family that you reach out to, and then eventually, if you meet them, maybe once a year or every couple of years, it's like, what's up? It's weird, but it's really great. And so we tap into that resource very often. They're our first line of defense. We go to the offices first before we go outside of the offices, and you're usually 1 degree away from a really good story when we do it that way.
Do you want to see pitches from outside producers, or do you not take pitches from outside producers? So I have that question. And also, how do you define a network for women or stories about women? How do you even define that anymore?
We're not saying we're stepping away to tell just female-focused stories. We're telling the stories that are being neglected by other spaces because people think no one cares. But we're half the population. We spend a lot of money. So we want to talk about things we're interested in. And yes, we take pitches from everywhere, and they don't have to be fully developed. It could just be a good idea.
I just wanted to know how you made those leaps, and how do you do it when you're in scenarios where you're talking to people that don't want to speak about sex, or in a culture that is absolutely nothing like yours?
You can find something to relate to people with in almost any culture. This is a good story. This when I was a freelancer, I was reporting in Syria, and I was with some rebels. And we were having a very serious conversation, and I wasn't getting a lot out of them. And especially in places like Syria and the Middle East, hospitality thing, they ask you about your wife, about your children, all that. And I told this like very serious commander in like army fatigues, old gray beard, about a relationship I had that just ended. And after that, he was just like through the roof, just like smiling, just being like, "Look, there's plenty of other fish in the sea. It wasn't meant to be. You know, you'll find some. If she was meant for you, it would have worked out. You just got to keep trying. You can find something to relate to people about anything, and once you make them comfortable, then they'll talk to you about anything. And that's what your job is as a producer, as a correspondent. That's 90% of it is making people comfortable enough to open up to you and talk to you, and tell you things they might not necessarily want to say.